Okay, so now we have a little bit of an application made, and it just says "Hello World," and it's centered, and it's bold, and it's sans, and it's out there. Great, but there was a lot of copy and paste. So let's just take a look at some of the elements that were used in that copy and paste that we'll need to know when we actually start to write our own code. Just following along back with the tutorial. We left off on Get Started. We finished that actually, and then it's followed by React ES6. So if you're taking this class at El Centro College, I recommend that you read this. Yes, React ES6. Basically, it's the sixth version of the ECMA script. It was published in 2015, and it's also known as ECMAScript 2015. Well, big deal, right? Well, it's just basically, it's a standard version of JavaScript that's been agreed on by experts, etc. So it's nice to read as to why you should learn ES6, and it tells you why. This would make a lot more sense if you go within this very same website, W3 Schools, click on this JavaScript, and go through this tutorial and learn JavaScript. This is the whole thing, at least what they have. Is this standard? I think that as far as it gets to be standard, probably yes. Is it ES6? I don't know. But like I said, that's not necessarily part of this class. That's just something that they wanted to add here, just to let you know that there are standard libraries out there. React is a very specialized library, and that's fine. That's all we're interested in, and we're going to be using small elements of it. But in order to learn all that, you would really need to take an additional 2, maybe 3 classes. This is just an introduction to what React is, and this is just a lesson in the class. So I'll skip then to React Render HTML. That's what this exercise is going to be about. So we actually, in that little application that we had, let me go to the code pen, look at my dashboard, and my first React app is there. And just taking a look at what the HTML says. The HTML doesn't say much because everything's inside a division, and the ID, my div, everything happens really in the JavaScript. And you'll see that we have actually already created a class, a function called hello, and it extends React, and it renders the component. So that's what this little lesson's about. Let me go back. I'll click on the box here to my pick pens, and I'm going to create a new one. I'll create a new pen, and I'll click on the pencil there and call this one render React. And let's go see what this is all about. React Render HTML. React's goal is in many ways to render HTML in a web page. So what does that mean, to render? Basically, it just says, hey, I'm getting this code, and I'm going to let you look at it. I'm going to print it onto the screen. I'm going to show it to you. React renders HTML to the web page by using a function called React DOM. That's why we loaded the DOM, and that's I have links earlier in the class to show you, where you should go to look for more information about DOM. DOM was probably touched on a little bit on Web 2. I doubt that it was in Web 1, but let's just say that it's a bunch of containers that make up your HTML page, and we're going to be using plenty of containers in this class. The render function is render.render, and then the void here, which would be filled with something else, whatever argument you want to render. And it takes 2 arguments, the HTML code and the HTML element, as we did before. Oh, I already closed it. That's fine. We have the sample display a paragraph inside of the root element. And we did that in the first one, and this is actually a repetition of that. React DOM render, just say print what? Print in the paragraph, it opens and closes, and it says hello. And it does this by getting the element root. So what is root? Well, root is going to be the what body is actually displaying inside of this division. If we look at the example, we can see that their HTML, which is just a very basic HTML, it declares an HTML page. We know that it's going to be in English. It's got some head information that has the title, and it's got the viewport so that it can be seen on a mobile device. And that's pretty much it. And the body just says, hey, get me a division. By the way, the ID to use is root inside the JavaScript. Root is being defined, and we're looking at how it's importing the React and React DOM, which we don't have to do for this class. And then it repeats the line that it gives us in the sample. So it's saying that it's calling this function to render, and we're going to render the word hello. So it's basically using a lot of JavaScript, a lot of code to make sure that it's going to then display the paragraph that says hello. I can't edit this in this particular thing, but once we get to the code pen, we'll be able to change some of these things. So even though this is probably confusing if it's the first time that you take a look at it, I know that it confused me. We'll go through it and look at more examples as we go along. So the HTML code in this tutorial uses JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript XML. And what is that? Well, that's a concept that is coming up in the next lesson. So before I stumble my way through this, let's wait until we get to React JSX. Just know that it's something we're going to be using. XML is what eventually HTML was going to become, and that's why we had XHTML in the past. Now we have HTML5, and the XML still is out there, still useful, but it gets pulled in different ways, such as React. So once again, do not worry if this is unfamiliar. We'll get to it in the next chapter. Here's a sample, and I see that they're building a little table. Create a variable that contains HTML code and display it in the root node. Look at the wording here. Create a variable that contains HTML code. So we're no longer really writing HTML code to display a page. So this is a different kind of programming now. Now it's actual programming. We're going to define a variable. So we're going to say, I want to hold this content here, and then I want to display it on a web page, as opposed to just saying, I want to display a web page, and this is what I should say. Oh, and here's some extra code. No, this is going to be different. So let's run this sample, and it does what it promised. It's basically a little table here. It's got no border, so we can just see the name, John and Elsa. Well, big deal. That's just an HTML page, right? But it's not inside the HTML page. The HTML page has none of that code. The HTML page only gives us the root ID and the division, and everything else takes place inside of the JavaScript. The JavaScript is declaring a constant, or rather, yes, a constant called myElement. And then the element actually consists of all these HTML elements inside of it. Then we use the React DOM render to actually display it out here. So let me close that, and let's keep on going here. They gave us a little bit of explanation of the root node, and so far I think that we've used the root ID. And what they're telling you is that they're just sort of doing it as a sample, but we don't have to use a div element. We don't have to create a division. We can use any other element, and we don't have to call it root. So they gave us a quick example. Inside of the very simple HTML code, they say instead of using a div, they're using a header, which is a different kind of division, and they're giving it the ID Sandy, and they close it, and then they write the code accordingly. So this one says hello inside of Sandy, and that will give us the paragraph on the side. The index.html, the HTML is very similar to what we've seen so far. Only thing they did here is that they changed the names to show us that they don't have to be root and they don't have to be divs. They could be other things. So we've gotten this far. I'm going to go to the next chapter. This is where JSX is. What is JSX? It's JavaScript XML. It allows us to write HTML and React, and it makes it easier to write and add HTML to React. And this is something that will become a little bit clearer as we work through the exercises. It tells us that to code the JSX will allow us to write HTML elements in JavaScript and place them in the DOM without the create element and or append child methods. Those are things that are important in JavaScript, etc. But here we're going to limit it. We're going to make it quicker. Our framework here will allow us to pull information from JavaScript that will create the HTML for us. You're not required to use JSX, but it makes it easier to write these applications. They gave us a couple of samples. One has JSX and the other one does not. So let's look at these. And I created this render React file. I'm going to run the first example, and it says I love JSX. It imports the files that it needs to import, and then it declares this constant. It's called my element, that then will be equal to some HTML elements, and that's our program. On the right side, we'll display this HTML. It's just a header one with the verbiage I love JSX. Then the function down here says pull that element and display it. So I'm not going to copy this on top. I'm going to copy these last two lines. Just copy that. Go to my render.react, and I'm going to dump this on the JavaScript. Just paste it there. Of course, nothing happens because this is a blank file, and it's in the blankest. This is the blankest of files, really. It's got no HTML. So what I need the most basic HTML page. I can say, hey, this is some HTML coming up, and it'll finish quickly. In here, I'll do a division, even though it could be something else. Why don't I say header? Close header. And actually, before I close it, I guess the header could say that the ID is going to be root. Make this text larger so that it's easier to read. So HTML, header ID root, header, etc. And we have the JavaScript here. Like I said, this is still a blank file, so I need to tell it in the pen settings that the JavaScript needs a preprocessor that's Babel. We need to add a CDN, that's the first React that shows up. This one, and then the next one, which is React DOM. So now we have React and React DOM. I'll save and close. And now it understands that we have this JavaScript that's declaring a constant called myElement. That is a header one that says I love JSX. And then it's going to get the element by ID. The ID that we declared is root. So it's telling us I love JSX. So great. Why is this important? Well, this is the first one that they show us. In order to compare it to without JSX, we have basically the same code. I'm going to run this sample and see how when I go back between these two windows, they very much look like they have the same code, which in essence they do. The index is the same. It's exactly the same file. They have a very simple file. They declare HTML. They declare English as a language. We see that this has got the viewport to fit a mobile device or any device. It gives the page a title, which we don't need to. But then the important part here is that the division has an ID of root. And if we go to the other example, on the other page that we have open, you'll see that it's the same. Let me get the JavaScript. The JavaScript on both of them, although very similar, they both load up React and React DOM. One says, this one, the one that does not use JSX, just has this constant declared myElement, and then it just goes about the rough way here to try to display it, and it's just creating an element in H1 that says I do not use a JSX, and then it's got these brackets that I'm sure have a greater purpose, but here I can't edit, so I can't tell you what it is. This one says I love JSX, period, and then it just shows it up here on the side by rendering the element by getting the element by the ID and putting it there. So I'm going to close these two samples, go on to the next one, and they just tell you that the first sample allows JSX to, actually JSX allows us to write HTML directly within the JavaScript code. It's an extension of ES6 and it's translated into regular JavaScript. So then it says we can actually get some expressions going. So let me run this sample. we've already got the React DOM, and the index is something based on root, so that's fine. That will allow us to work with our code. But let me get the constant that says that React is better with this technology, with JSX, instead of just I love JSX. So I'll paste it here, replace the code. React is 10 times better with JSX. Something that they tell us is that, well, why is this important? See how it says React is 5 plus 5 times better, and it actually did the math. This will come in real handy and will become very important later when we're actually writing our own applications, because let's say here at some point I declare a variable and I call x. It says x is equal to 5 and a semicolon, just so that it ends there. And right now it says that React is 5 plus 5 times better than with JSX rather. Well, 5 plus 5, I could just type in 10 and it will display it. Or I could say it's x times. And this is important, and this becomes cool because now I can use this variable to say, well, x times another number, x times 2. So now I get the same result. I don't have to add 5 plus 5. I can say that it's 5 times 2 times better than with JSX. And thus it becomes a lot more dynamic in its nature. If I were to take the block that it doesn't have JSX, you can try it out if you want. I tried it myself. Basically, you can copy this and try to put the or declare the numbers or declare the variables within the braces, and nothing happens because it doesn't work that way. You would have to do additional programming if you wanted any type of dynamic content to appear within this page. Okay, so far we've been displaying a couple of lines here and there. React is 10 times better with JSX, and that's fine. That's awesome. That's great. So we're now going to insert a large block of HTML. HTML, if you remember from your web classes, you can just type, do your whole coding and keep on writing from top to bottom for as long as you have the imagination to do so. There's really no end to the page. Here, though, we've been displaying one page at a time, so what they're trying to tell us is that if we want to do a second line, it's going to become a little tricky. So this render React, I'm going to save it because this is, if you're taking the class, this is something that I want you to turn in separately. So I'm going to just go back to the box here and create a new pen. And I'm going to title this one HTML stack. And then go back and see, okay, what do they want us to do? Index is the simplest of index pages. That's got the root. So I can either type it or I can copy and paste, but I know that all it is that I need to have I can have the HTML here, and I can have the body, and I can have a whole bunch of things, but CodePen doesn't really require a lot of things. So open and close HTML, and here I'll say, well, now there's going to be a body, and that'll close. And inside of the body, there's going to be a, let's just say H1, and, well, no, not H1. Let's go back and see what they're telling us to do. I'm writing my own HTML page, like I know what I'm doing. So we're just getting actually we're just getting that division and making sure that we have the ID, because we're going to pull it by the ID later. So we'll paste it here. And of course nothing happens because we still need the JavaScript. I'll close the space here and go and look at the JavaScript in the sample. I'm going to copy the constant that declares my element, and actually that's the one I already did, so we don't need that one. We want this unordered list. So the unordered list says constant my element equals, and everything else. I'll copy that And what they're telling us is that in order to get all of these elements to be displayed, they all have to be inside of the parentheses. Otherwise, we will not get multiple lines. You see what the error is here? It says an unexpected token. It's this bracket. And this may have something to do with the fact that in my settings, I have not yet declared that this is a JavaScript that depends on Babel, and that it needs to have the React and the React DOM CDNs. I'll save and close that. So now we get a list: apples, bananas, and cherries. And everything is nice and dandy as long as it's inside of these parentheses. Something went wrong. Let me refresh the page. And that's a different kind of error that I don't know what it is. Let me pause real quick. I'll be right back. $21.11. Okay, I don't know if this is still recording. So, I don't know what the error was. But okay, so what's going on though? It's just showing us that we have this unordered list, and it's apples, bananas, and cherries, and everything is being put in within these parentheses so that we can see everything. Something that they tell us in is that there's only one top level element. Let's say, well, this is what? These are my groceries, right? So what if I wanted to say in my HTML stack document, I have this element, right? And then here, why not, or before that, I want to display, I put this back here. I want to display a header, and I'll say H1 and my groceries, and close the H1. If this were an HTML document, I would see my groceries at the top of the list, and then I would see the unordered list with all the list items below that. But we don't see them. The explanation is that we can only have one top level element, and the HTML code must be wrapped in this one top level element. So if you want to write two headers, you must keep them inside a parent element, like a div element. And what that means is that, well, just like you have declared that I am a header here is inside of H1, and I'm a header 2 is inside of a second H1, everything needs to be sandwiched inside of another parent. These are children elements. So I can go back and say, well, my groceries, etc. I can open up, well, before I get too happy, it's going to be in the sample. It's parentheses and then bracket. So my parentheses are open, and I can say that, well, all of this right here is going to be, oh, let's say it's part of an article. And then at the bottom of the list, we'll close the article, /article, and close the tag. Once this is done, I can see that it will render my groceries. That's the header, the H1. And here my line 3, and then the rest of the unordered list. So it becomes a little bit more extensive in the coding part, but everything is done within these tags and all these parents so that you can keep track of them. And once we get to code longer applications, this will become real evident as to why it's a good practice. The last thing, it says that elements must be closed, and this is something that I recommend that you just read it over and understand what they're trying to say, which is that JSX follows XML rules, and therefore HTML elements must be properly closed. Close empty elements with space / bracket. So just like this one here, input type is equal to text. This is just got the one. It doesn't have an opening. It just is one element. It doesn't have an open and a close. So they tell you that do a space / and bracket, and that will work fine. Once again, I cannot edit this here, but maybe at the beginning of the next video I'll show you why, or what would happen if we don't close it. It would give us an error. At any rate, so I have created two files. HTML stack was the second one, and it's saved. This is the URL for it. Whatever your URL is, I need you to turn it in for this assignment. And before that, let me save this. Make sure to save early and save often. Make sure that then you turn in that HTML stack, and you also turn in the link to the one we did first, which was render React. Just copy and paste the URL, and React is 10 times better with JSX. Make sure that you have some sort of math going on here, and that you have an element there with a variable, and I'll see you in the next video.